reads, the subject for late debate has been chosen, and therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly recognize and congratulate this government for taking action toward achieving fairness and equity by working with African Nova Scotians in our province since June of 2009. Submitted by the member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the final report for the Eco Nova Scotia.
Report is tabled. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the fee schedule for the environmental assessments. This fee schedule was requested by the opposition during question period yesterday, and I am pleased to provide this information. Mr. Speaker, this information is also available on our website.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be reading this on behalf of the Premier.
Thank you.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 80,000 people attended the Grand Chief Member 2's 400 celebrations last year during Her Majesty the Queen's visit to Halifax, and the celebrations generated an estimated $2.5 million in economic benefits. And whereas the event was one of 3 finalists for the Tourism Industry Association of Canada's 2010 National Tourism Event of the Year, and whereas the Mi'kmaq Association for Cultural Studies recently confirmed Halifax will host the 2nd International Maui from July 1st to the 3rd. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Mi'kmaq First Nation for their success in promoting their rich culture and heritage, and join me in wishing them all the best in this year's 2nd International Maui. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over 200 Atlantic Canadians committed to preventing and reducing crime will come together in May 25th Annual Atlantic Crime Prevention Conference with the goal of making our schools and communities safer. And whereas an issue of recent concern is internet bullying and the safety of our young people, and with a focus on school safety, this conference will be an opportunity to learn from others across Atlantic Canada and work together to make our schools and our communities safer. And whereas this conference will connect crime prevention and community safety advocates with educators and leaders to raise awareness of good practices and programs that can address, improve, and promote a safer school environment, and that to provide tools to help improve community safety. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House recognize the commitment of all of the organizers, partners, and participants of the 25th Annual Atlantic Crime Prevention Conference. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make a brief introduction before I read my resolution.
Most certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring your attention to the gallery opposite me. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce Don Baldwin and Jania McMillan, both representing Meeting Professionals International. That's a tongue twister. I would ask the House to give them a warm welcome.
We welcome all visitors to the gallery and hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. The Honourable Minister, Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April the 14th is National Meetings Industry Day, recognizing the value of the meetings, conventions, and events business to our economy, and whereas the Atlantic chapter of Meetings Professionals International is celebrating this day by acknowledging the leadership of the province of Nova Scotia and Halifax Regional Municipality in supporting the new convention centre with the presentation of this year's Influence Awards. And whereas the Atlantic chapter of Meetings Professionals International is a strong advocate on behalf of the thousands of people employed by the region's meetings, conventions, and events industry. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Atlantic chapter of Meetings Professionals International on their work to promote the importance of their industry and the new convention centre in creating jobs and new business opportunities for Nova Scotians while showcasing our province to visitors from around the world. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, may I make an introduction?
Most certainly you can.
The school insurance program recently extended accidental injury insurance coverage to registered school volunteers. This change will ensure that the many volunteers involved with schools all across the province are covered in case they have an accident while on duty. And joining us here in the gallery today, we have Ron Marks, the School Insurance Program's chair of the Board of Directors. We have Diane McCrae, the CEO. And we have Helen Mary Green, our risk manager. And I would ask that the members of the House give them a warm welcome. And I thank them for being here.
We welcome all our visitors to the gallery and hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 10th to 16th is National Volunteer Week, and volunteers are the driving force of community-based learning and activities at schools all across this province. And whereas the school insurance program has been providing accident insurance to public school students for school hours and activities at no cost to parents or students since 1998. And whereas the school insurance program has recently expanded its insurance coverage to include accidental injuries for registered volunteers while they are participating with students at schools. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly thank the school insurance program, their staff, and the countless school volunteers for helping us make our community-based learning and other school activities so effective for our students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eco Nova Scotia program supported 140 projects and programs helping communities across the province reduce greenhouse gas and air pollutants emissions. And whereas Eco Nova Scotia projects have resulted in hundreds of good jobs, contributing millions of dollars in wages and helping to grow our economy. And whereas the program resulted in cost savings for municipalities that lowered their energy consumption, saving that will continue for many years to come. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Eco Nova Scotia program for its success and remind the federal government that we would be happy to see more funding to create similar programs in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's organized and supported a delegation of companies to the Clean Tech Forum held in San Francisco March 14th to the 16th, and whereas the International Forum gives clean technology companies the opportunity to network and meet potential investors, and whereas the 5 Canadian companies, including Carbon Sense Solutions, Green Power Labs, and Seaforth Energy, that made it to the final round of pitching their products and services to Silicon Valley representative, 3 were from Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Carbon Sense Solutions, Green Power Labs, and Seaforth Energy on their impressive showing at the highly respected international event. Mr. Speaker, request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I introduce this bill, with your permission, I'd like to make an introduction.
Most certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the gallery opposite, I'd like to introduce and to welcome to the House today Mary Townsend, Director, Materials Management, Canadian District Health Authority. And I'll ask him to rise. Jerry Wilson, Coordinator of Procurement, Annapolis Valley Regional School Board. Diane McInnes, Manager of Procurement, Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation. And Anne Janega, Canadian Manufacturing and Exporters. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the House to give them a warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce the bill entitled the Public Procurement Act.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Public Procurement in Nova Scotia.
Bill number 23, an act respecting public procurement in Nova Scotia.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of Strategic Planning and Performance Management in the Government of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Inverness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of Strategic Planning and Performance Measurement in the Government of Nova Scotia.
Bill number 24, entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of Strategic Planning and Performance Measurement in the Government of Nova Scotia.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today has been declared Day of Pink to mark the International Day Against Bullying and Discrimination in schools and communities, and whereas no one should have to experience the negativity created by discrimination, and whereas Day of Pink is more than just a symbol of a shared belief in celebrating diversity, it is also a commitment to being open-minded, accepting differences, and learning to respect each other. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House recognize Day of Pink and support the continuing efforts in our schools and in our communities to overcome incidences of bullying and discrimination. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today is Pink Shirt Day, where people across Canada are urged to wear a pink shirt to indicate that bullying will not be tolerated. And where Pink Shirt Day was born in the Annapolis Valley in 2007 when Travis Price and David Shepard took a stand against bullying and wore their pink T-shirts in support of a fellow student at Central Kings High School in the Annapolis Valley who was being bullied. And whereas bullying in recent weeks have all seen the tragic results of bullying here in Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of Pink Shirt Day and remember that all of us have a role to play in supporting the victims of bullying and stamping out bullying in our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Adrian Satterley of Terrence Bay has been selected as the Male Athlete of the Year at Acadia University. Whereas Adrian was named the football team's most valuable player while also winning the AUS Football Conference's Lineman of the Year award. And whereas Adrian Satterley played minor football for the Timberley Titans. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Adrian Satterley on his selection as Acadia University's Male Athlete of the Year 2010-2011 with best wishes in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. I got one here.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this NDP government conducted public consultations and convened a forestry panel and a steering panel in order to get advice about the long-awaited forestry strategy as mandated by the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. And whereas the Minister of Natural Resources has now paid a Vancouver consultant $98,000 to help him decide which advice he should choose. And whereas this inaction on the future of Nova Scotia's forests has created undue uncertainty among those who make their living in the forest. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House call on the Minister of Natural Resources to end the uncertainty and get on with the job of tabling a balanced forest strategy for our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on January 21st, 2011, the St. Margaret's Bay Seniors Association opened their office in Tantallon, and whereas Heather Cochran and Joan Murray stressed the goal of the association is to help seniors live well and stay in the St. Margaret's Bay area by not only providing information to seniors, but gathering information from seniors to determine their needs and wants in the future. And whereas this office will be open each Tuesday and Thursday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the St. Margaret's Bay Seniors Association on their success and wish them all the best as they continue to assist seniors in our community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Winter Games were hosted in Halifax from February the 11th to the 27th, 2011, and whereas Justin Barkos of Avonport represented Nova Scotia on the badminton team, and whereas Justin has played badminton since he was 6 years old and has won other titles such as school provincial men's singles in grade 10, 11, and 12 for Horton High, Mount Allison's most valuable player in badminton for the 2010 and 11, and played in the College Nationals and was awarded Canada-wide MVP for the Atlantic Provinces and the most sportsmanship like a team. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Justin Barkhouse on his past sports achievements and for representing Nova Scotia at the 2011 Canadian Winter Games. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Kinsman Club of Sackville has been serving the community's greatest needs since 1961, and whereas on April 23, 2011, the club will be recognizing its membership, past and present, as well as their community's civic leaders for their support and participation over the past 50 years by hosting the 50th anniversary gala at the Kinsman Centre, at the Kinsman Community Centre. And whereas the club has provided ongoing support for special needs development daycare facility for the past 30 years and are proud supporters of the local Boys and Girls Club, Scouts and Girls Guides of Canada, local minor sports organizations, the Autism Society, the Canadian Cancer Society, the MS Society, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Children's Trust Foundation, the Abilities Foundation, high school scholarship programs, the Kinsman Community Fund, and many other worthwhile charities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Kinsman Club of Sackville for hosting their 50th anniversary gala on April 23, 2011, and thank its membership, past and present, for the more than 45,000 hours of community services over the past 50 years. Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wendy Lill has been an active member of the Nova Scotia artistic community for 25 years, has written 9 stage plays, 10 film screenplays, and numerous radio documentaries and dramas, and her work has been recognized by a Gemini Award, Labatt's Canadian Play Award, 4 Governor General's Award nominations, and a Chalmers Award nomination. And whereas Wendy Lill is a founding member of Eastern Front Theatre, has been active in the disability community, and served as Member of Parliament for Dartmouth from 1997 to 2004. And whereas Wendy Lill recently earned the prestigious 2011 Robert Merritt Legacy Award from Theatre Nova Scotia for her substantial contribution to the world of theatre in our province, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Wendy Lill on winning the 2011 Robert Merritt Award and for her diverse contributions to the rich tradition of theatre in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Education Week is a great way to honour our teachers and partners who are using innovative teaching practices for the benefit of our students, and whereas Queen's educators provide students with opportunities to develop a wide range of skills and attitudes to become lifelong learners, and whereas Elizabeth Woodford Collins of Liverpool Regional High School is one of 23 educators who received an award for using innovative teaching methods to provide students with the tools to be successful in their studies and beyond graduation. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Elizabeth Woodford Collins of Liverpool Regional High School in Queens on having received an award during Education Week for using innovative teaching practices for the benefit of her students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 4-H program, whose motto is "Learn to do by doing," has been an integral experience in the lives of many young Nova Scotians since 1922. And whereas the Kevin Grant Rural Leadership Tour, held in memory of longtime 4-H participant Kevin Grant, offers 4-H members opportunities to learn about leadership in rural communities. And whereas Tyler McLaren of Antigonish was one of the 4-Hers who participated in this year's Kevin Grant Rural Leadership Tour from March 15th to 16th, visiting several businesses and rural landmarks in Cumberland County. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House applaud Tyler McLaren and the other 4-H Kevin Grant Rural Leadership Tour participants on their achievements and wish them best of luck in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the town of Amherst, Nova Scotia, recently held a curling event with the proceeds going to the palliative care unit of the Cumberland County Regional Hospital, a cause dear to my own heart. And whereas the Good Looking Guys team included members Don Smith, Robert Bird, Joe Dupuy, and Brian Wood, challenged the Better Looking Guys. Team members Carl LeBlanc, Mitch Esterbooks, Stu Colson, and Kurt Spigot in this major curling event. And whereas this event raised more than $13,000 to be donated to the palliative care unit of our local hospital. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating the Good Looking Guys and the Better Looking Guys and all the people in Cumberland North who came out in support of this curling event for the palliative care unit of the Cumberland County Regional Hospital. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Upper Hammonds Plains community member and Emmanuel Baptist Church member Marco Simmons is well known in his community for his musical talent and contribution to the Nova Scotia music scenes, and whereas he is a graduate from Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, and is an experienced music producer, arranger, director, singer-songwriter, and choir director, and whereas Marco Simmons has been named for 2 East Coast Music Awards this year and will perform his song Rise Again with the Nova Scotia for Haiti artists at the televised awards show in April. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate music producer, singer, songwriter, choir director, and Upper Hammonds Plains community member Marco Simmons on being nominated for 2 East Coast Music Awards in 2011 and wish him the best of luck in his music career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read my resolution, may I have your permission to make an introduction?
Most certainly.
Thank you. In the gallery opposite, I'm pleased to draw the attention of the House to Gary Randall of Kentville. Welcome, Gary. Gary is a very active member of the Kentville community, makes many contributions, and a valuable member of the Kings North NDP Riding Association. So I hope the House will give him a warm welcome.
We welcome all our visitors to the gallery and hope you enjoy today's proceedings. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Centreville's General Store has been a landmark in the community for the past 160 years, and whereas Ron and Bernice Ward were part of that heritage of service to the community as owners of Ward's General Store for the past 27 years, and whereas the Wards have opted to take a well-earned retirement after arranging with Wayne Nixon to continue the business under the store's new name, Copper Convenience,
Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Ron and Bernice Ward on their long association with an historic business and wish both the Wards and Copper Convenience every success as the business continues to serve Centreville and the wider community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2010 was the first successful year of Mahone Bay Pirate Festival and Regatta held in the town of Mahone Bay to take place at the Mahone Bay Classic Boat Festival. And whereas the festival was such a success that many volunteers are coming forward with new ideas about what can take place during the second annual Mahone Bay Pirate Festival and Regatta to be held July 29th to 31st, 2011. And whereas Committee Chairman Rick Welsford is currently working on new proposals for upcoming festivals and encouraging volunteers to get involved as well. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the enthusiasm and spirit of volunteerism displayed by Rick Welsford and the Mahone Bay Pirate Festival and Regatta Committee and community members in organizing yet another successful festival for the year of 2011. Mr. Speaker, I require waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Trinity United Church in Mulgrave will celebrate their 100th anniversary on May 15, 2011, and whereas Trinity United Church has been an important spiritual, educational, and social community gathering place in the town of Mulgrave for the past century, and whereas the congregation will highlight this historic milestone with community celebrations from May the 13th to May the 15th, 2011, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Trinity United Church, the ministers, and entire congregation on their 100th anniversary with the very best wishes for future success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over the winter, business owners in Cole Harbour met to generate interest in a new business association, and the Association for Business in Cole Harbour was established. And whereas the mandate of the group is to effectively market businesses in the Cole Harbour area, be involved in the local planning process, and improve public safety. And whereas the association was formed by members of the business community as a new initiative to drive more business to the growing area of Cole Harbour. Therefore, be it resolved that the House recognize the important contribution of the Association for Business in Cole Harbour to the increasing number of businesses in this growing community. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Andrew Rowe of Timberley has been named to the World Football Team by the International Federation of American Football, and whereas the World Team recently lost to the USA Team in a final score of 21-14, and whereas Andrew, a graduate of Sir John A. Macdonald High School, played for the Vancouver Island Raiders of the Canadian Junior Football League during the 2010-11 season. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Andrew Rowe on his selection to the World Football Team with best wishes in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delivery. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on January 29, 2011, Lindsay Doucette, Sarah Spatford, Marin Avery and Ellen Graham traveled to Calgary to represent Nova Scotia in the Canadian Junior Women Curling Championship. And whereas the Doucette team competed with teams from across Canada and finished with a record of 4 wins and 8 losses, and whereas the Doucette team demonstrated the true spirit of all Nova Scotians as they quickly became known as the friendliest team and acted as true ambassadors for their club and the province. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Lindsay Doucette, Sarah Spatford, Marin Avery, and Ellen Graham in their success of winning the provincial tournament and representing our province, and wish them all the best as they continue in this sport and strive to reach this goal again. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Susan LeBlanc Crawford portrayed the character of Sam in Zupa Theatre's 2010 production of 5 Easy Steps to the End of the World, and Louisa Adamson was the lighting designer for this same production. And whereas the 2011 Robert Merritt Awards were presented on March 28th in recognition of excellence in Nova Scotia theatre, and whereas Susan LeBlanc Crawford earned the 2011 Robert Merritt Award for outstanding performance by an actress in a leading role, and Louisa Adamson earned the award for outstanding lighting design. In addition, Zupa Theatre Company also earned the 2011 award for outstanding production for 5 Easy Steps to the End of the World. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Susan LeBlanc Crawford, Louisa Adamson, and the entire Zupa Theatre Company on their nominations and the 2011 Robert Merritt Awards. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Master Corporal Richard Dixon of Queens County has received the Mention in Dispatches Award from the Governor-General of Canada for his bravery during his last tour of Afghanistan. And whereas this national honour is given to active soldiers or other individuals working with the Canadian Forces who display a level of bravery or commendable service. And whereas Master Corporal Richard Dixon, for receiving this honour, has been given a bronze oak leaf to wear upon that particular campaign medal or service medal ribbon. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate and recognize Master Corporal Richard Dixon for receiving the Mention in Dispatches Award and for his courageous actions during his last tour in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Russell Gammon, formerly of Lions Brook, Pictou County, has been honoured with a Distinguished Achievement Award from the World Jersey Cattle Bureau while attending the World Jersey Cattle Bureau Conference in February 2011, which was held in New Zealand. And whereas Mr. Gammon has been an employee of Jersey Canada for 30 years, and because of this he's had the opportunity to travel to many countries to educate about and promote Jersey cattle. And whereas Mr. Gammon is passionate about his involvement in Jersey cattle and Jersey Canada, and is one of the founding directors of Partners with Purpose, a Canadian charity involved in the provision of adult literacy training and microcredit programs in Haiti. Therefore, be resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia Legislative Assembly congratulate and thank Russell Gammon for his commitment and dedication to the Jersey cattle breed and to his community. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Education Week is a cooperative effort to recognize and honour teachers and education partners in their work with students, and whereas Bruce MacDonald of Antigonish has been a social studies teacher for more than 30 years, most recently teaching history and sociology at Dr. J.H. Gillis Regional High School, and whereas the 2011 Education Week Awards with the theme of innovative teaching in the 21st century were recently presented to Bruce MacDonald and 27 other teachers and partners. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House congratulate Bruce MacDonald on receiving a 2011 Education Week Award and thank all teachers and education partners for their dedication to educating Nova Scotia students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cumberland County Heritage Network is a fine example of the dedication and spirit of the people in our area. And whereas recently our government acknowledged this great spirit through the awarding of a $200,000 grant from the Strategic Development Initiative. And whereas the Minister of Tourism and Culture and Heritage has recognized the Cumberland County Heritage Network for having excellent ideas for sustainable Made in Nova Scotia heritage projects. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly joins me in congratulating the Cumberland County Heritage Network on being awarded $200,000 from the Strategic Development Initiative and wishes them continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. I hereby give notice on a whereas giving high schools access to technology in the classroom fosters and advances learning, and whereas Best Buy Canada's Best in the Class Fund is a community investment program that provides technology grants to schools across the country. And whereas Millwood High School was awarded $20,000 in January to go towards purchase of new school computers. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulates the students and teachers of Millwood High School on their winning application to the Best Buy Canada's Best in the Class Technology Grant. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Edmund Woolmuth, a 10-year-old resident of Port Williams, was one of over 150 athletes who competed in the Atlantic Athletics Indoor Track and Field Championship held in Moncton on March 5th, 2011. And whereas Edmund practices with other members of the Launchers Athletics Club and at Central Kings Rural High School and trained for the Pee Wee Under-11 Triathlon, which is composed of shot put, long jump, and a 60-meter dash. And whereas Edmund was the first place finisher in a very hard-fought triathlon, therefore be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Edmund Woolmuth on winning the Pee Wee Under-11 Triathlon at the Atlantic Athletics Indoor Track and Field Championships and wish him all the best in his future athletic endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Centre Scolaire de la Rive-Sud is the first-class modern facility with classes from primary to 12 with 160 students and offers special programs for 4-year-olds located in Cookeville, Nova Scotia. And whereas the French language school provides a space for the region's francophones to share their common language and culture in an educational setting and also provides community spaces. And whereas Centre Scolaire de la Rive-Sud opened its doors in September 2010, celebrated its official opening on March 4th, 2011, with the Education Minister Ramona Jennings in attendance, as well as provincial and municipal representatives. Therefore,
Order, please. Order, please. Order. You cannot name a member by their name. You have to name them by their either the minister or their riding. So I would ask that you actually change that resolution, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas Centre Scolaire de la Rive Sud, which has been operating since September 2010, celebrated its official opening on March 4th, 2011, with the Education Minister in attendance, as well as provincial and municipal representatives. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize the official opening of Centre Scolaire de la Rive Sud in Cookeville, Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 37th Provincial Volunteer Award Ceremony and Luncheon was held on April the 4th, 2011, and whereas each year the province of Nova Scotia recognizes individuals who have made a significant contribution to their community, and whereas in recognition of his contribution to various community organizations, George Freire is one of the 2011 Representative Volunteer Award recipients. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate George Freire on his 2011 Representative Volunteer Award for the community of Mulgrave and wish him every success in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. It is now 2:53. 4:23. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. The MOU signed with the municipalities in 2007 emphasized regular and ongoing communications with the government, Mr. Speaker. Yet it wasn't until the morning of March 22nd, just a few hours before the press conference, where the government backed out of this agreement, that the Premier notified UNSM of the changes. So my question to the Premier, why did the Premier not contact the UNSM to inform them of changes until a few hours before he tore up the agreement?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Memorandum of Understanding in and of itself sets out the procedure. We followed that, and in fact, the notice that was required by the Memorandum of Understanding itself, in fact, is being followed. This demonstrates, I believe, our commitment to the memorandum that was signed with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities.
Here. Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Premier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Premier had asked municipalities, they would have told him that they are already facing tough challenges. HRM would have told him that the residents will be forced to make up $44.7 million shortfall. CBRM would have told the NDP that the people of Cape Breton municipality will have to make up $3.2 million shortfall, Mr. Speaker. The municipalities would have told the Premier they'd be going to force to raise property taxes and cut services. So my question to the Premier, why did the Premier act unilaterally instead of working with the municipalities to prevent this tax increase?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with all respect, the reality is that we meet frequently with the municipalities. I certainly do, and I can tell the Leader of the Opposition that the process that is in the Memorandum of Understanding sets out a notice period, which is exactly what we gave them, so that they will have an entire year, Mr. Speaker, to prepare for the end of the upload from the municipalities to the province. Mr. Speaker, I want to be absolutely clear. Not a single cent of cost will be transferred from the province to the municipalities.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Speaker, if the Premier meets with municipalities regularly, why did he wait hours before he tore up the MOU to tell them about it? Mr. Speaker, if he'd been meeting with them regularly, he would have told them long before that. Mr. Speaker, by not working with and listening to municipalities, every property tax bill will be going up because of this reckless decision. Mr. Speaker, they didn't listen when Nova Scotians said they didn't want the NDP to hike the HST, and they didn't listen when they hiked 1,400 user fees. So my question to the Premier, why was the Premier intent on using municipalities to impose yet another tax increase on Nova Scotians?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is quite different than the Leader of the Opposition paints. The reality is that there was a comprehensive consultation with Nova Scotians who told us that they understood the government had to get back to balance and that the government had to control its costs as well as finding new revenue sources. So, Mr. Speaker, we have shown considerable progress in getting back to balance. We are not in a position any longer to continue to absorb costs from the municipality. We can no longer afford to take those costs on. So we, in fact, have shown respect and commitment to the Memorandum of Understanding with the municipalities by giving them the one-year notice that is specifically provided for in the MOU.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the fall of 2008, my question's for the Premier, by the way, in the fall of 2008, otherwise known as before the election, the then Leader of the Opposition wrote, and I quote, and I will table, quote, governments should ensure that the cost of gasoline is as fair and low as possible at a time when so many families see their standard of living threatened by skyrocketing energy prices. At that time, that member's advice was to change the HST so there is no tax on tax when you buy fuel at the pump. It's high time, he said, that we stop taxing the tax on gasoline. Well, Mr. Speaker, with gas at over $1.30 a litre, it's time for the Premier, the now Premier, to take his own advice. And so my question for the Premier, through you, sir, is this: will he, in fact, now take his own advice and give Nova Scotians some much-needed tax relief by eliminating the tax on gasoline?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe this question was actually asked some time ago. The reality of the situation is that if we take the tax off of gasoline at this time, that will mean that the deficit of the province will grow. And I'm sure the Leader of the Conservative Party would not want that to happen. We have said that there are a number of tax measures that we would like to do to give further relief, like we already have, like taking the HST off of home heating, like taking it off children's clothing, like the other fairness measures that we have put in place. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, because of the horrendous financial mess left behind by the former government, we are not in a position to do that today.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the matter is, when he was in opposition, the Premier did his own math on eliminating the tax on tax. And he said, I quote, the end result would only mean that government doesn't accrue quite as high a windfall at consumers' expense every time the price of gas rises. And so my supplementary question to the Premier is this: why won't he do what he said he would do then and stop accruing this windfall at the expense of consumers and this unfair tax method?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out previously, unfortunately the government is not in the position to do this at this point in time. We have a number of tax fairness measures that we'd like to be able to implement. We have already implemented many of them. We are helping particularly small businesses by reducing the small business tax rate, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to point out that at this point in time, of course, unlike in past governments when the royalties of gas were increasing and they were running up surplus after surplus that they were then spending just before the end of the financial year, unlike that, Mr. Speaker, any revenue that this government has to give up, of course, adds to the deficit, does not become a windfall in a surplus as it did to previous governments, unfortunately.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I guess that the Premier, when he was in opposition, forgot to put that magic asterisk at the end of his promise to Nova Scotians at that time, which explains in small print that he didn't actually mean what he said he meant. So, leaving his word for a moment, I would just like to point out, by way of my final supplementary to the Premier, that the member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank in October of 2008, in other words, before the last election, said, and I quote, "The federal excise tax and motor fuel tax is applied to gasoline before the HST, an unfair taxation method." And I've just tabled that. And so, if he felt that way when the HST was 13%, I can only imagine how he feels now with the HST at 15%. And so my final question is this: if the Premier won't take his own advice from the past, will he at least consider the advice of his Minister of Economic Development and get rid of that unfair tax?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with all respect, that demonstrates the problem with a pre-written supplementary. They've already had the answer to this. There are many tax fairness measures that we would like to be able to undertake. If we had surpluses, I'm sure that that's what we would do. As I said, we have to manage deficits created by the former government where they had surpluses, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the Conservative Party should understand that reality is not an asterisk, it's an exclamation point, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker. The NDP has increased 1,400 fees on services that Nova Scotians use every day. What this government has done and what they continue to do is to make life more expensive for Nova Scotians. Yet not one NDP minister can explain why these fees were increased. Yet increases that go beyond cost recovery are a tax, Mr. Speaker, and this government has not been able to produce one piece of evidence that this is based on a cost recovery and not another way for the finance minister to take money out of the pockets of Nova Scotians. So my question for the Minister of Finance, can the minister produce any evidence that individual input costs have gone up, or will he finally admit this is just another hidden NDP tax grab?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another day, same question, same answer, Mr. Speaker. All required reports have been filed, Mr. Speaker. Every bit of information that is required by the law has been filed. And if the honourable member opposite wants to know about increase in the cost of government, I would suggest that he examine the budget.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What will the NDP learn? You simply cannot tax Nova Scotians to prosperity. Mr. Speaker, this minister has made it more expensive to go fishing, hunting, or camping. In fact, youth admission to the Shubenacadie Wildlife Park has gone up 29% under the Minister of Finance. This government has made it more expensive to get permits. They have made it more expensive, Mr. Speaker, to use a ferry. Mr. Speaker, this government has made it more expensive every time someone interacts with a government service. The minister has made it more expensive for Nova Scotians to access the government of Nova Scotia. So my question to the minister, why did the minister choose to use user fees as another way to tax Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, in an ideal world, nurses, paramedics, teachers would all work for free. Hospitals and roads would build themselves. But in this world, Mr. Speaker, they don't. And that is why the government requires revenue. Now, when the government requires revenue, it has two choices. One is to get it from the general tax base. The other is to get it from the people who are actually using the service. Our choice was to increase the fees for the people actually using the service, and perhaps the leader of the Liberal Party could explain why he would add these costs to the general tax base so everybody is paying for it, whether they use the service or not.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be upfront and honest with Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, hardworking families have to pay more. This minister has hiked the HST. He's taking more and more income from Nova Scotians each year. The minister is forcing hardworking families to pay more every day. There is no doubt that no minister in this government have any idea why their user fees went up, because the idea didn't come from their staff. This was a directive from the Finance Minister, Mr. Speaker, another directive from the Finance Minister to take more tax money out of the pockets of Nova Scotians. So my final question to the Minister, will the Minister confirm that this was his directive to hike the fees and not based on a cost recovery model identified by staff in the departments of the other ministers?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my first answer, if the Leader of the Liberal Party would like to know what the cost of government is, I recommend to him that he examine the budget.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in debate on estimates, I asked the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations if he could tell Nova Scotians why fees went up in his department. He said that, quote, it might be better to question for the Minister of Finance because it was his department that imposed these changes on the fees, end of quote. The Minister had no idea why these fees went up, except to say that the Minister of Finance told him to do it. My question to the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations is, were these fee hikes indeed a directive from the Minister of Finance?
The Honourable Minister for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister of Finance. I think that the honourable member opposite, Mr. Speaker, when he reviews Hansard, he'll find that there'll be a slightly different analysis there. What I conveyed to the member during estimates was that the fees went up as a result of requests by Minister of Finance. It's cost recovery. Those fees go up by Consumer Price Index, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, yesterday during the estimates, I heard very clearly, and I asked very specifically twice I asked, and it's in Hansard. The Minister indeed said it was a directive from the Minister of Finance and his department. Mr. Speaker, this is not leadership. Senior staff should know exactly what everything costs in every part of the department. They should know immediately what the cost is to do everything in every department. But the Minister didn't know. He didn't know if these hikes were cost recovery or if they were, as he quotes, to clean up the finances of the province. That's quote out of Hansard, end of quote. The question to the Minister is, did the Minister at any time ask his staff if these fees, hikes, related to cost recovery?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite was a minister in a long-forgotten administration. He obviously, I would think, would recognize the way the estimate process works. I have my staff around me, so if I don't have the answer at my fingertips or on the tip of my tongue, I refer to my staff. So certainly the staff provided me with the information, and yes, I asked my staff that question then.
The Honourable Member for Preston on your final supplementary.
Maybe Mr. Speaker didn't understand what I was saying. What really I said was, did the Minister ask his staff prior to the meeting before this new tax was imposed on Nova Scotia? Mr. Speaker, the Minister said clearly that he takes direction from the Minister of Finance without question. Hard-working Nova Scotians are paying more, and this Minister doesn't even bother to check with his staff prior to a tax being increased. The Minister couldn't tell Nova Scotians why they were paying more for services which his department delivers. He can only say, ask the Minister of Finance because he told me to do it. The question to the Minister is, Mr. Speaker, who is in charge of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, the Minister or the Minister of Finance?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, yeah, that's a question I asked many times.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that all members of Cabinet, all members on this side of the House rely on the good advice of the Minister of Finance, and the government's plan is to bring the books back to balance by 13-14, and if the member was paying attention to our estimates when he asked the question, then he should have noticed that he got an answer during the estimate debate, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that immigration is a key to the future success of our province. As the Premier's former minister responsible said in an opinion piece published last July, and I quote, "Newcomers not only bring social and economic benefits to Nova Scotia, but they promote openness to new ideas, experiences and creativity, creating a stronger province." Those are great words, Mr. Speaker, but the time has long come for actions and not just words. In 3 consecutive throne speeches now, this government has promised an immigration strategy. Now, this is a government that loves strategies, and yet we remain in limbo, waiting for action on this important area of our future prosperity. And so my question to the Premier, will he finally commit to actually getting on with the job of providing us with an immigration plan for the future of the province?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the Leader of the Conservative Party soon, very soon.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking for the asterisk after that soon.
Exclamation point, I guess.
We've been waiting a while. For example, a member for Queens, a member of his party, rightly pointed out way back in April of 2007, 4 years ago, and I quote, "We have serious problems in rural Nova Scotia with population decline, aging population, out-migration of youth. And immigration to rural Nova Scotia is going to be so important in the future to not only increase our population base, but also in terms of our economics." Very wise words spoken from the member for Queens 4 years ago, and I have that and I will table it. And so my question to the Premier is this: why have you done nothing after 2 years in office to take the advice of the member for Queens and get on with the job of providing us with a true plan for immigration?
The Honourable the Premier.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Quite the contrary. I try always to take into account the advice from the member from Queens. She's very wise in these matters, and I can tell the Leader of the Conservative Party that, in fact, the immigration strategy for this government is very important. We've been working on it. I in fact, have read through many of the foundation documents for our coming immigration strategy. We have had what I think is a very comprehensive, strategy for bringing together all of the stakeholders. I've managed to receive that advice, and we are in a position where soon we will be able to release the immigration strategy. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to make sure that the immigration strategy was not like the one that failed, Mr. Speaker. The previous government did not have a immigration strategy that was meeting the needs of the province of Nova Scotia, so we wanted to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we got it right.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your final supplementary.
That was a blur.
Mr. Speaker, way back before the last election, the Premier, in his Better Deal plan, promised that the government would double immigration targets if they were elected. Okay. And if you look, it actually is checked off as a year one promise of the government, and I will table that. Great reluctance, I let it go, Mr. Speaker, but I will table it for you, sir. As it turns out, the only thing that has doubled since that time is that the government has twice more made the same promise. And so the time is long past for nice words and for promises, Mr. Speaker. We are all still waiting for the government to do the right thing. And so my final supplementary is this. Isn't this just another example of an NDP broken promise?
Honourable the Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker, there aren't broken NDP promises. Of course, we intend to keep all of our commitments, and I don't blame them for not wanting to let go of that document. It's a roadmap for success, Mr. Speaker. I want to point this out to the Leader of the Conservative Party. We have already instructed the departmental officials as to the target with respect to immigration, but there is one serious deficiency, Mr. Speaker, and that is this, that into the economic stream, the province of Nova Scotia is capped at 500, Mr. Speaker. Now, the province of Manitoba, which has roughly 250,000 more people than Nova Scotia, has 5,000 nominees under this program, Mr. Speaker. If the Leader of the Conservative Party has any influence with the Prime Minister, if the Prime Minister continues in his place after the election, then I would ask him to ensure that the immigration strategy is able to access more nominees, Mr. Speaker. That would make for a successful immigration strategy.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the Harper government placed a cap on the number of provincial nominees Nova Scotia can recruit under the provincial nominee program to 500. Now, this is significant for a couple of reasons. The cap restricts Nova Scotia's ability to recruit skilled labour for jobs that are tough to fill. In other words, it's a double whammy in that it stifles both economic and population growth. A cap also reduces the amount of funding our province receives for immigrant settlement services. Services needed to ensure that when an immigrant makes a choice to settle in Nova Scotia, they stay in Nova Scotia. So my question to the Premier is, why has he failed to publicly denounce the Harper government's cap on the number of provincial nominees our province can accept?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, I would very much like to thank the member for Richmond for that question, Mr. Yes, that's true. I didn't think I'd ever say that, but the reality is, I think he would understand what I just said with respect to this. I think it's wrong that the province of Nova Scotia faces the kind of cap, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, I raised this very question not only at the Council of Federation, but also with the Atlantic Premiers Conference, Mr. Speaker, and in fact, we publicly talked about the need for a revamped immigration strategy, that one that benefits not just Nova Scotia, but in fact all of Atlantic Canada. Other provinces face the same kind of problem with the cap that we face.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, today is probably the first day Nova Scotians have heard this Premier actually speak publicly to them about his concerns over this cap. Because while he was whispering it to some of the other provincial premiers at meetings, apparently they were having a bit more success in dealing with the actual issue. Because as the Premier already acknowledged, Manitoba, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have all successfully lobbied the federal government to raise the initial cap numbers that they were being presented with. Yet, Nova Scotians are still stuck with a 500 cap limit. So my question again, why has the Premier failed to take on the Harper government and demand that the 500 cap be increased for Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we have raised this issue with the federal government. And, Mr. Speaker, in addition to raising it, the member opposite would understand that the freeze on these programs were put in place before we came into government. It has not been lifted. We believe that this is, therefore, those provinces that were better organized earlier, those ones, for example, like Manitoba, who, quite frankly, have one of the best immigration programs in the country, were able to get a larger designation of nominees. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, in this province, we have a government that is actually taking immigration seriously. We're putting together a comprehensive immigration strategy, and I want to assure the member from Richmond that we intend to do everything we can to get an appropriate designation among the immigrant nominee stream.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government's been in power for almost 2 years. And we've heard from day one how important they took immigration and how they would have a new strategy. Yet today, Mr. Speaker, we still wait for that to happen. But regardless of what's in their strategy, if the cap remains at 500 by the Harper government, one has to question what success we can expect the strategy to have here in Nova Scotia under those types of restrictions. So my final supplementary to the Premier is, what strategy do you have in place to fight for Nova Scotians so that the federal government removes that 500 cap?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've been raising this issue through the department and through my office with the federal government, because it is a matter of grave concern to us. But, Mr. Speaker, I would point out that the nominee stream is only one stream among many others. And one of the things that the new and more comprehensive immigration strategy will do is position us to take advantage not only of a nominee stream, but of the other immigration streams that bring new Canadians to this country.
The Honourable Member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's introduction of the new action plan and the government's investment in helping those who suffer from autism spectrum disorder is a great step forward in helping reach Nova Scotians diagnosed or soon to be diagnosed with autism. However, like many other plans and strategies that this government has produced, the plan lacks a timeline for when it will be implemented. In the plan, the government announced an expansion of the Early Intensive Behavioral Intervention Program that was, of course, brought forward by our government a number of years ago. Mr. Speaker, my question to you, to the Minister, is, assuming the expansion of the program means there will need to be more earlier interventionists, how many early intervention teachers does Nova Scotia need in order to administer this program province-wide, and what is the plan for recruiting and training these specialists?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, yesterday was a great day in Nova Scotia for families with children with autism. We announced the most comprehensive action plan for children with autism in our province history, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure the honourable member that staff in my department, prior to that announcement, had already begun the work at looking at what personnel will be required to implement fully the EIBI program for all families and children with autism in the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Argyle on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary is very basic, is that when can we expect the expansion of the EIBI program to be fully implemented? What is the timeline giving every child access to this great program?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we can fully expect this program to be in place over a 2-year period, and the work has begun now, Mr. Speaker, on making that a reality.
The Honourable Member for Argyle on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Through you, simply to the Minister, will the program be standard across the province, meaning that a child in Argyle will have the same access to the same standard program as a child in Windsor, in Halifax, in Ingonish, or anywhere else in the province?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the features of this program has been the evaluation, which tells us that there is a very significant success rate for children who are enrolled in this program. And Mr. Speaker, the quality and the standards will be uniform across the province. All families will be receiving the same high-quality program with the evaluations that have demonstrated its effectiveness.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness.
When government finally announced the coverage of Lucentis, they immediately set out to establish protocols aimed at limiting access. Not only did they restrict injection privileges to retinal specialists, they limited the delivery site to one location, Halifax. But, Mr. Speaker, for residents from your community and other communities in Cape Breton, travelling to Halifax when a retinal specialist is available in Cape Breton seems illogical. My question to the minister is, why did the minister fail to grant the retinal specialist in Cape Breton injection privileges starting January 1st?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think you would recognize, as most members of this House recognized, how hard we worked to make Lucentis, a very expensive drug, available to people in Nova Scotia. Prior to our announcement of expanding a program, making Lucentis available January 1 of this year, people were paying about $2,000 per injection per eye. And Mr. Speaker, most people in this province who were receiving treatment were receiving it here at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital through the retinal clinic. And our announcement was that we would initiate our program here in Halifax, January 1, and that has been the case, Mr. Speaker. And at the time of the announcement, I indicated that we would be looking at how we would roll that program out to perhaps satellite clinics around the province. But we were starting here, and that has been the way we've introduced the program, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think what's important to know is it is good that we've got the service finally in this province, and it's important to note that we were the last province in Canada to offer Lucentis to our residents. But when the government announced the program last fall, we expressed concerns about access, and so far those concerns are founded. Mr. Speaker, we're not talking about a situation where injection privileges were denied because a professional does not have the requisite qualifications. We're talking about a specialist in Cape Breton whose qualifications are no different than the specialists injecting Lucentis in Halifax. My question to the minister is, can the minister confirm that the retinal specialist in Cape Breton has received training in Halifax to prepare him to begin injecting Lucentis in Cape Breton?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the status is of the retinal specialist that she makes reference to, but I would certainly be happy to look into that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is the case that when we did the work and we established the program here at the QE, at that time, our information indicated that all of the retinal specialists in the province, in fact, were here at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that's not the information that we have. We understand that there is a qualified retinal specialist in Cape Breton, and that the people of Cape Breton would rather have the service there than to travel to Halifax. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, since she has indicated that there will be a plan or is a plan to roll this out further, when can residents in Cape Breton expect to receive Lucentis treatments closer to home?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very well aware of the importance of attempting to have services that are appropriate for people in their regions. That's why I was so pleased to be in Cape Breton to expand the cancer program up there, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated, this program at the retinal clinic here in Halifax is relatively recent, only since January 1. And as we work through the implementation of that program, we will be looking at how we might provide this in other locations of the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, The Minister of Health and Wellness stood in her place to tell members how her government's policies are reducing emergency department bottlenecks to the QE2 and providing Nova Scotians with better access to emergency care sooner. But only 1 week later, on Monday, a code census was called at the QE2, exactly at the same time when the CBC was doing an interview on that very issue, at the very facility the minister was bragging about only last week. So my question to you to the minister, was the minister premature in providing such a positive update about the situation at the QE2?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, since we opened the rapid assessment units and the additional general medicine beds at the QE2, more than 1,200 people have been diverted from the emergency room at the QE2, Mr. Speaker. So I would say, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member, I think if he spoke to any one of those 1,200 people, they would tell you that they have been the beneficiaries of the work of this government and the changes that we have brought to that situation at the QE2.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My first supplementary through you is again to the Minister of Health and Wellness. We know that the dedicated health care professionals are working very hard and that they're very frustrated by events like code censuses. I don't know how you'd actually say that one. What steps added is the minister taking to investigate what happened at the QE2 on Monday and what to ensure that code census do not become a common occurrence?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think, Mr. Speaker, in an earlier question period, perhaps not in this session, but some time ago, I indicated that I went and met with the Capital District Health Authority Board, and I told them that my #1 issue and priority for their district health authority was a solution for the emergency room here in the Capital District Health Authority. And as part of their accountability to me for what it is that they are doing to address this issue, I get a regular report from the chair and the CEO every 3 months on a quarterly basis. And I look very carefully at the information that's being provided to me. And Mr. Speaker, what I'm very pleased to say is that things are moving in the right direction. There are improvements. There's more work to be done, but the trend line is heading in the direction we want it to head in, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on your final supplementary, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the minister told this House that the rapid assessment unit is only the first step in solving overcrowding, of course, talking about more medical beds. But we saw on Monday that this is not foolproof. Is the rapid assessment unit model going to be evaluated in response to the setback?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, there is no setback. Mr. Speaker, the assessment and evaluation is ongoing in that unit. We will constantly look at flow. We will look at what's occurring in other parts of the hospital. And I want to remind members that we will be implementing the first ER standards in the country, and that work is well underway, and they will contribute to a better quality service and a much more efficient and effective emergency healthcare system in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, last spring, the Minister of Finance told Nova Scotians that they would not be able to review a socioeconomic study which was done on the true and full costs of gambling in Nova Scotia. This report was completed by Mark Analeski, but was suppressed by the NDP because they didn't like what the report had to say. Today, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Commissioner has made her ruling on and stated clearly that the report must be released to the public of Nova Scotia. My question to the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, now that the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Commissioner has told the government in no uncertain terms that this report should be released to the public, will the minister table this report in the House today?
The Honourable Minister for Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, but I would have to refer that to the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development because that Freedom of Information request is under her department.
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we have received the review officer's report very recently. We're going to take time to review it and the recommendations very thoroughly, and we will not be making any comment until that time. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't the first time that this government has been called out by an independent official for hiding information from the public. It was this time last year when the Auditor General was forced to withhold an opinion because the NDP wouldn't release documents from the IEF. And now they are being called out by the Freedom of Information Officer for withholding this document. My question to the Minister of Labour, Workforce Development, what was this government hiding, and will the Minister table this report in the House today?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind members of the House that we inherited that particular situation. We were very concerned and received advice from 3 departments that the process being used, the methodology being used to do this research was not considered to, it was considered to be flawed, quite frankly, and that the information, the conclusions would not be helpful. The contract was terminated. There was no finished final report, and those were some of our concerns. But again, we take the recommendations from the review officer very seriously. We will be carefully considering that, and we'll make a decision in due time. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this information needs to be made public, and it needs to be made public now. It should have been there, of course, before the most recent strategy was put forward. Government refused to provide the document according to the Commissioner's report today. They refused to provide the document a year ago, saying it wasn't being released because of problems with its research techniques. She rejects the province's argument that the document is exempted under the Freedom of Information law because it may provide advice, recommendations, or draft regulations to a cabinet minister or public body. By hiding this report, the NDP has called into question the validity of the entire gambling strategy. My question to the minister, once again, will the minister table this report in the House today?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government takes its time and makes sure that it has the highest level of decision-making based on accurate information and careful consultation. And certainly we will continue to use that process in the best interests of Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question... Thanks. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, yesterday our caucus spoke of the pressure that Capital Health District is facing when it comes to the efficient flow of patients from hospital beds to alternate levels of care, such as nursing homes and residential care facilities. Media reports from last November had stated that as many as 100 nursing home beds from across the province were empty at that time, while hundreds of people were waiting for placement in nursing homes and waiting in hospitals. One can easily see that there was a big problem, a big disconnect at that time, and it still isn't corrected. My question to the minister is, other than assessing patients on weekends and attending ribbon cuttings for nursing homes previously announced, could the minister tell us what solutions her department has implemented to ensure patients are placed in more appropriate health care settings faster?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's important that members realize that the opening of new nursing home beds in this province represents a significant investment in our seniors population and in our healthcare infrastructure. And I don't think that the people who work in nursing homes and who operate nursing homes will appreciate being belittled when they get these fine new facilities up and running, Mr. Speaker, and seniors are able to come off wait lists and out of transitional care units and get the care that they deserve and they need, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think what we're asking about here are what plans has the department put in place to speed this up, because the problem is languishing. Mr. Speaker, yesterday there were 101 patients within the Cape Breton District Health Authority waiting for placement in an alternate facility. That doesn't include people waiting at home in the community or in their own homes for nursing home beds. On November 15th of last year, the Cape Breton Health District Authority was dealing with 96 patients requiring placements in alternate facilities. So clearly, the challenge is not going away. We have in fact, a few more people waiting today than we did then. Nursing homes and residential care beds announced by the previous government have opened in Cape Breton, and one can only assume that they have been fully filled. My question to the minister is, would the minister table before the end of business today the number of vacant beds in nursing homes and residential care facilities within the Cape Breton district today?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that seniors have options to stay in their homes or in their communities longer, but we also want to make sure that they have access to long-term care beds and that there's an appropriate utilization of hospital beds. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, this government is investing $21 million this year in 169 additional new long-term care beds in our healthcare system, as well as more than 500 replacement beds, Mr. Speaker. And this is a tremendous investment at a time when it is a very fiscally challenged situation for a government in our province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and we appreciate that hearing those numbers. I'm always pleased to see when there's new beds coming, but I would like to know how we're dealing with the disconnect between the vacant beds in nursing homes and the smooth transition of people from transitional beds into those beds. And that was an issue last November, and I'm asking the minister today whether she can tell us how many vacant beds in nursing homes and residential care facilities there are today in Cape Breton District.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member indicated earlier in her question, and I believe yesterday in a question, we have a number of initiatives underway in the department that are analyzing how we can improve the efficiency of moving people from a hospital bed, for example, into a nursing home bed. And a report is being finalized right now as we speak, Mr. Speaker, and it soon will be on my desk to consider the various options that are being outlined. And Mr. Speaker, I look forward to receiving that report and sharing it with the public and with the members.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, the Metropolitan Regional Housing Authority is the largest housing authority east of Montreal. The Metro Regional Housing Authority maintains more than 5,000 homes for people who cannot afford market rent. Upwards of 20,000 HRM residents rely on the Housing Authority for their basic need, shelter. But today, Mr. Speaker, 33 members of the NSGEU Local 47 are in a position to strike. which threatens valuable services to many marginalized residents of HRM. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, Local 47 members are asking for wage parity. Does the Minister and her government believe that they deserve this?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. The employees of the Metro Housing Authority do extremely good work, and we know that and we recognize that. We also recognize the importance of their work for the seniors, and that this is an issue that is in a process of collective bargaining, and that's where it should be. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if we are to see these valued employees take to striking, more than 20,000 low-income Nova Scotians will be without adequate administrative support to answer their inquiries, assist with applications, send maintenance workers to fix problems, collect rents, pay contractors, and purchase much-needed supplies to keep units habitable. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, it's been a two-year effort to get a contract. The ask is for wage parity. Does the Minister and the Government believe that the efforts of Local 47 members should be as valued as other housing authorities in the province, such as Cape Breton, Yarmouth, and Pictou?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member has to understand that he pointed out a variety of different areas throughout the province. There's many areas in the province that there is negotiations and will be negotiations. And as I said, it's so vitally important that we let that process play out. We, as a government, respect the negotiations and the collective bargaining, and we will be watching and knowing that they will come to a satisfactory conclusion. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, every day the employees of Local 47 do their jobs with great pride. They take care of poor, vulnerable people that most of society turns their backs on. They offer them shelter and security. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, is the NDP government of Nova Scotia turning its back on Local 47 because of who they help? Doesn't the Local 47 deserve wage parity?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to know that, and we have shown this over and over within this government and within the Department of Community Services, that we care and that we know and we make plans. We have a contingency plan ready to roll out in case the collective bargaining breaks off with a strike, but we have faith that both will come to the table and come to an agreement. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. On Monday, the Minister announced the NDP would lower the cap on the annual amount of virgin forest biomass that can be used to generate electricity from 500,000 to 350,000 dry tons. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually a little bit surprised. I'm a little bit surprised they're clapping since we told them it was too high last fall and they said we were wrong. And in fact, lowering the cap to 350,000 dry tons, a little more.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And furthermore, lowering the cap to 350,000 dry tons is nothing more than the token gesture announced because of the protest today. And as we previously said, any forest biomass allocation before the forest strategy is released is premature. Mr. Speaker, it appears the Minister isn't even really sure how much biomass is already being used to generate electricity in the province. So, Mr. Speaker, would the Minister please tell this House exactly how much biomass is currently being used to generate electricity in the province today?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question. We're taking a very cautious approach to the use of biomass for renewable electricity. We listened to the steering panel who recommended that we be cautious on this issue, and in light of that, we've reduced our amount of dry tons from 500,000 to 350,000, and biomass is a very small portion of our renewable energy going forward, and it's a way that we can get off of imported dirty coal that comes all the way from South America. It's a way to get off of imported oil from halfway around the world, and it's a way that we're going to reach our 40% goal by 2020.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised the minister would use those talking points after the rally today, and the information he's been provided that shows that forest biomass, it can hardly be considered a renewable resource that should be included in renewable electricity. Mr. Speaker, at the time, we demanded that the minister table the decision, the former minister table the decision that justified including 500,000 tons of forest biomass for electricity generation. The science behind it. The minister refused to do so. We have a new minister, a new announcement. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll try with the new minister. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Energy table by the end of today the scientific evidence that supports 350,000 tons of dry forest biomass being used to generate electricity in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Biomass is really a byproduct in our forest. It's used in the highest and best use of the resource that we have. It allows new trees to grow for the next crop of next generation of trees. And it's really about using the best possible use. The mature trees are harvested, whether for logs or pulpwood or studwood or firewood. Biomass is really the end product that gives the woodlot owner another opportunity to clean up his woodlot and make it more sustainable going forward.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it'd be interesting to know if the member for Halifax-Chebucto agrees with you on that one. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that the minister's own science given to his department disputes what the minister just said. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is making decisions on economics of biomass instead of the sustainability and economics of our forests and our forest industry and the many different types of jobs that come with it. Mr. Speaker, there are many other biomass options, including supporting our struggling agriculture industry through the use of marginal farmlands or waste materials, and these are proposals being pioneered in Nova Scotia, yet the government is failing to support these ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister agree today to change the renewable energy plan to guarantee that the primary source of biomass-generated electricity comes from non-virgin forest sources?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And biomass can come from different sources. Forest products is certainly one of them. Agricultural waste is another. And, it's a renewable resource, and it's going to get us off of coal, it's going to get us off of oil, and again, it's going to allow us to use 40% renewables for electricity before this decade is out.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, further to his previous comments a moment ago, I'm sure that he's aware that all of the research out at the moment indicates that biomass from virgin forest stands actually has a higher carbon footprint than many of the energy sources being used in Nova Scotia today. Mr. Speaker, however, here we are with the Minister of Energy is making decisions based on biomass without a forestry strategy in place. So, Mr. Speaker, since the Minister of Energy couldn't answer, I'll ask the Minister of Natural Resources. Will the province's natural resources strategy was due by law on December 31st. Where is it?
The Minister of Energy. The Minister of Natural Resources. Freudian slip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The natural resources strategy has been a long time coming, but it's going to be worth waiting for. I'm excited about the prospects of going to be in the strategy. It's got a lot of good policies. We've already announced the 50% reduction in clear cutting. There's going to be no whole tree harvesting. There will be no public funding for herbicides. There will be an annual allowable cut. Biomass will be under the forestry code, and there's just a lot of good things in that strategy, so it's going to be coming very soon.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the protesters didn't believe him when he said it today, and I don't believe him now that it's coming soon. You know, Mr. Speaker, the minister announced on Monday that they would lower that cap for biomass, yet he did not talk about how that would affect hardwoods and high-value timber. He said that biomass comes from the lowest value, yet he only needs to go to Guysborough County to see that is not the case. And in fact, hardwood stands that hardwood producers would like to have are being destroyed for biomass. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister, what thought has his department given towards ensuring that high-value trees and hardwoods are not affected by biomass use?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if the honourable member remembers, in our budget that was announced last week, there was $5 million in there for forest strategy moving forward, mostly around silviculture and certification and aspects of Category 7 silviculture in particular that would allow for more selection harvesting and better management of our forests on a sustainable basis moving forward.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister can talk all he likes about putting money in for silviculture and so forth and improving forestry practices, but the fact is this government has not put their money where their mouth is. Mr. Speaker, we have learned the fact is this department was by law required to deliver a forest strategy to the people of Nova Scotia December 31st, and they have not done that. Mr. Speaker, recently we learned that a large paper company was purchased by an Asian consortium, a conglomerate that is actually known for some of the worst harvesting and ecological stewardship on the globe. Mr. Speaker, we now know that the government is looking at what to do with the $90 million loan that this government gave to Northern Pulp. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister, is that $90 million secure, or will Nova Scotians be on the hook for a slush fund donation to a company in the minister's riding?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I had the opportunity to sit down with the new owners, Paper Excellence, that are purchasing the Northern Pulp Mill, and I was very glad to hear that they will be moving forward with sustainable forestry practices. We double-checked on that. We talked to some of the mills that they operate and some of the governments in the provinces of Saskatchewan and British Columbia. We're reassured that they will be moving forward in a sustainable method. And I asked them specifically, you know, the air quality issue that was promised to the Pictou County, they will be spending that money for environmental cleanup. So at this point, I have every confidence in the ability of Paper Excellence to be a stable environmental company here in our province.
The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, during estimates last week, I asked the Minister if she could provide an update about the renovation project underway at Badek Academy. And I want to thank the Minister and her staff for providing me with additional information about the current status of the project. However, Mr. Speaker, I've had a number of calls from concerned parents and community residents about possible cutbacks to the project. Originally, the project was supposed to be completed in 2012, and the community had agreed to an extended timeline of completion by 2013-2014 and expected the project to proceed as planned. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister is, since the timeline has been extended, is it forcing the cost to increase and the scope of the project to be cut back?
The Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for more information on the Badek School. I am not able to provide that information. I don't have that detail here, but I will ask staff. But I can say that when a project has been approved, there are no cutbacks or any changes to the alterations without going through my office, and I would have to look at those, and that has not been brought to my attention. So the member member can be, Mr. Speaker, the member can be assured that there has been no discussion around that at the department, but I will make sure that the staff review that to see if there's anything that we can provide the honourable member with at a further time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her response. Mr. Speaker, the plans for the project were originally presented to the school community in November of 2009. In March of 2011, revised plans were presented that would create a reduction of classroom space in the junior high and the elementary wings. Also, the concerned community members believe the improvements to the elementary wing are now purely cosmetic and no longer encompass the needed renovations. So, Mr. Speaker, my question again through you to the Minister: has the department created a band-aid solution to cut costs, or is it still committed to the renovations initially agreed to in its first plan?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to assure the member opposite that when a project is agreed upon, that is the project that the community will be receiving. Mr. Speaker, the school boards are the ones that tell the Department of Education what alterations, repairs, what new projects need to be taking place in their community. So I don't have all of the detail, but I can tell Mr. Speaker, I will like to assure the member opposite that if the project was approved, that is the project that they are going to be receiving. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the Minister for her assurance that this project will be, the renovations will take place as planned in 2009. But I do know that it was a department representative who presented the revised plans to the school community in March of 2011. Mr. Speaker, some parents believe the school is losing program space and that it will not receive the technological requirements it needs for the education in the 21st century. So my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, is what assurance can the Minister give that the school will not lose program space and it will get the technology requirement it needs?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's very, very important that when we are doing our renovations and alterations in a school that we meet the needs of our students. And the needs of our students have changed significantly over the last number of years. And technology is a component that we need to making sure that our schools, when they do get their renovations, that they're up to date. So I would like to assure the member through you that I will go back to the department and I will personally review this file just to make sure that everything is in place that school needs. But I would like to say that everything is based on making sure that our children get the best, healthiest, safe, and technologically updated program space that is absolutely needed in their community. And that I will stand here and promise the member that we are going to make sure that we deliver the absolute best spaces when we renovate for our students. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP government increased taxes in Nova Scotia by hiking the costs of 1,400 user fees. While Nova Scotians expect to be charged the costs of delivery of a service by government, any additional costs is clearly a tax grab. The Department of Justice has increased the fees for dozens of services provided by the department. So my question is, will the Minister of Justice advise the House what analysis was carried out by his department to justify